This is the story of how a band of Catalan outlaws, who lived on the frontier between the Muslim and Spanish kingdoms, became some of the most sought-after mercenaries in history, defeating various Turkish tribes, the Byzantine Empire, and finally becoming the masters of Athens. Called the Grand Catalan Company, they were arguably one of the first, or even the first, mercenary companies in history. They usually hired themselves out to the highest bidder, but only as long as they got paid. Many an emperor or duke who hired the Catalan Company learned this the hard way. In the middle of the 13th century, Pope Innocent IV declared Frederick II, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, a heretic. Frederick was excommunicated a total of 3 times. Innocent's predecessor, Pope Gregory IX, had even gone so far as to declare Frederick the precursor to the Antichrist. Much of this anger was due to the papacy finding itself caught between, quote, the German hammer and the Sicilian anvil, as the historian J.A.A. Landring put it. As King of Italy and Sicily and the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Frederick ruled both the lands north and south of the Papal States. However, Frederick's family, the German Hohenstaufen dynasty, which had provided many of the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire for the last 200 years, had also long been at odds with the papacy about another, more fundamental issue: whether it was the emperor or the pope who held the highest authority in the empire. When Frederick died in 1250, he left a power vacuum that many tried unsuccessfully to fill over the next 23 years, a period known as the Great Interregnum. Now, with the empire in turmoil, Frederick finally out of the way, and the Hohenstaufen dynasty weakened, the Pope could make a move against his hated enemies. For this, he looked south to the Kingdom of Sicily, which was ruled by Manfred of Sicily, one of the last remaining sons of Frederick II. In 1266, Clement IV became Pope and continued the work of his predecessor. He offered the Kingdom of Sicily to Charles of Anjou, a French supporter of the papacy who was as experienced in military affairs as he was ambitious in politics. Charles was crowned King of Sicily in Rome. Then, with the Pope's blessing and financial support, he invaded the kingdom and forced Manfred into a confrontation near Benevento. The battle, despite being in favor of Manfred, was over quickly. Manfred was killed in action, and Charles established the Angevin Kingdom of Sicily. However, the Pope's plans did not work out as intended. Manfred's daughter, Constance II of Sicily, was alive and well, and she was not only the heir to the throne of Sicily, but also the Queen of Aragon. This brought her husband, Peter III of Aragon, into the arena. Peter first tried to appeal to the King of France for help, but his diplomatic efforts to regain Sicily quickly failed. So he moved to Plan B, building up his army and navy. Many of his men were almogavars, a type of outlaw who lived on the frontier between the Muslim and Spanish kingdoms on the Iberian Peninsula, where an ongoing border war between Muslim and Christians was in full swing. The war was characterized by frequent raids, surprise attacks and ambushes. This was ideal for the almogavars because the mountainous, mostly barren and rock lands they lived on were the perfect training ground for such scenarios. Traditionally, they carried several throwing spears, a light hunting spear, and a heavy but short knife called a cotel. They wore loose coats, breeches made of hides, and little to no armor. In an era dominated by heavy knights and chivalric ideals, this type of warrior must have seemed like an archaic relic from the past, but such judgment would be premature. The almogavars were true professionals who lived for war. Their day-to-day lives consisted of carrying out small raids into Muslim territory to take livestock and captives and then selling them. In times of large-scale war, they conducted ambushes, attacked van and rear guards of armies on the march, or took prisoners in surprise attacks. They were particularly famous for their night attacks, in which they used their flintstones to generate sparks, creating the illusion of a massive army. This fiery showing was accompanied by frantic shouting, quote, "Awake, Iron, let's kill, end quote. In addition to these small war actions, the almogavars also took part in many open field battles in which they typically harassed enemy knights with their javelins from behind difficult terrain or field fortifications. Refusing to adhere to chivalric traditions, they often attacked the horses rather than the knights. Once the knights had fallen off their injured horses, the almogavars used their knives to finish the knights off. While Peter of Aragon was preparing to reconquer Sicily, Charles of Anjou was pursuing his own ambitious goals. He wanted to invade the Byzantine Empire, which had been at odds with the Western papacy for some time. An extreme example of this conflict was the 1204 sack of Constantinople, in which a group of Western crusaders sacked and occupied the capital of the Byzantine Empire and then established the Latin Empire, which was later reconquered by the Byzantines. To re-establish the Latin Empire, Charles built up his forces and continually increased the taxes on Sicily and extorted the local population in every way possible. On Easter Monday of 1282, just before the start of the evening vespers at the Church of the Holy Spirit in Palermo, the population of Sicily had had enough. A riot broke out against the local garrison. It quickly spread across the island, with only Messina, the key port city, remaining under Charles of Anjou's control. Not long after, the Sicilians asked Peter III of Aragon, who had a claim to the throne via his wife, for support. Peter quickly gathered his army and sailed for Trapani, where he landed unopposed before marching to Palermo to be crowned king of Sicily. While the Sicilians received Peter of Aragon with great jubilation, they quickly noticed how badly his almogavars looked. Quote, "O God, how have we wasted our joy? And what people are these, who go naked and stripped, who wear nothing but a shirt and carry neither a draga, an oval leather shield, nor buckler? We cannot reckon on much succor if the King of Aragon's followers are all like these." End quote. The Sicilians couldn't have been more wrong. In the following years, the almogavars brought the Sicilians many military successes, even frequently defeating the heavy French knights sent against them by the Angevin rulers of southern Italy. For example, in February of 1300, a mounted force of Angevin knights and mercenaries under the command of Walter V, Count of Brienne, was ordered to secure the surrender of the city of Galliano. The French force was composed of young Angevin noblemen who all had lost family members in the war. They referred to themselves as Knights of Death and had vowed vengeance on the Catalans and Sicilians for their slain relatives. When the small force of 500 knights arrived at the city, they were confronted by 300 Catalan knights and 300 almogavars. But the Catalans did not attack them right away. Instead, they positioned themselves in a loose formation in the hills, trying to lure the Angevins to attack them on disadvantageous terrain. When the Angevins refused to take the bait, the almogavars waited till dusk, struck their weapons against the flint, creating sparks in the dark to intimidate the French. Then they advanced on the Angevins and started throwing javelins into their ranks. When the French finally charged them, the almogavars simply pulled back, taking cover in the darkness of night and the mountainous terrain. With the French disoriented and intimidated by the almogavars, who seemed to be all around them, the Catalan knights charged downhill and routed the Knights of Death. Their leader, Walter V, managed to escape with only a handful of his men. 2 years later, when the 1302 Peace of Calta Bellotta finally brought an end to the war, the almogavars found themselves out of work. The new king of Sicily, Peter's son, Frederick III, was eager to rid himself of the terrifying warriors as quickly as possible, before they started plundering his lands. The solution came from a former Knights Templar, pirate, and now mercenary and entrepreneur, Roger de Fleur. He was a businessman looking for an opportunity to make some money, and he found a victim with deep pockets in the Byzantine Emperor. Emperor Andronicus II Palaiologos was engaged in a war with the young and ambitious Turkish beyliks in Anatolia, and desperately needed military assistance. When Roger de Fleur offered his services in exchange for the hand of the emperor's young niece, Maria, plus double the usual pay for his men, Andronicus II hastily accepted. He also made Roger de Fleur Megas Dux, commander-in-chief of the navy. This marked the official formation of the Catalan Grand Company. Roger de Fleur and his men soon sailed from Messina to Constantinople. De Fleur brought between 2,000 and 8,000 men. Sources diverge on the number. 2/3 of them almogavars and the rest knights. Upon arrival, they quickly got into a conflict with the local Genoese merchants and were thus ferried off to the Asiatic coast of the Bosporus at Cyzicus, which was under siege by the Turks. According to the chronicler Ramon Muntaner, The Turks were taken utterly by surprise and soundly defeated by the Catalans. The following years, the Catalans pushed the Turks back on the entire front line, with their biggest successes being the liberation of Philadelphia and the Battle of Kibistra. However, these victories gave them ample opportunities to enrich themselves. Typically, they kept their plunder for themselves instead of sharing it with the emperor. This might have been because the emperor often paid them late and in debased coinage. So he wasn't exactly keeping his promises either. After many successes, the emperor became weary of Roger de Flore's ambitions. He behaved more like the governor of Anatolia than a trusted soldier. In the late fall of 1305, the emperor ordered the company back to Gallipoli, while Roger de Flore was invited to Adrianople to attend a lavish banquet. Once the drinking and feasting were well underway, a band of mercenaries burst into the room, killing Roger de Flore and his men on the spot. It's not entirely clear whether the emperor was behind this assassination, but that's certainly what the Catalans believed. In a fury, they began plundering the area around Gallipoli and soon waged war on the emperor. In June, the Catalan Company met the Byzantine forces on the battlefield near Apros. The almogavars and dismounted knights in the center easily repelled the first wave of Byzantine mounted archers, consisting of Turks and Alans. The entire Byzantine light cavalry force suffered heavy losses, probably due to the almogavar javelins, and subsequently fled the field, leaving the left flank of the Byzantine center exposed. It was not long until the Catalan infantry had reformed and charged the Byzantine center, quickly disordering and then routing them. In the meantime, the Catalan cavalry had engaged the Byzantine cavalry on the right. The Byzantines maintained their position at first, but were forced off the battlefield when the infantry from the center came up on their flank. Byzantine losses were reportedly very high. The defeat was decisive enough that the Byzantines would not challenge the Catalan Company to another major battle. To make matters worse, after the battle, two of the Turkish detachments that had fought for the Byzantines switched sides and joined the Catalans. For now, the company stayed at Gallipoli and lived off the land, which caused widespread devastation and depopulation in the area. After exhausting the countryside of Thrace, the Catalan Company moved to Macedonia in 1307 and finally arrived in Thessaly in the spring of 1309. There, they met an old acquaintance, Walter V of Brienne, whom they had defeated so many years ago at the Battle of Galliano. Walter V was now Duke of Athens, having inherited the throne from a distant relative, J.A.A. de la Roche, in 1308. Having first-hand knowledge of the Catalans' fighting prowess, rather than trying to stop them, Walter hired them for 6 months. He needed the help to defeat his local rival, John II Ducas, the ruler of Neopatros in North Thessaly, who strived for independence from Athenian hegemony. Walter ordered the Catalans to seize 30 strongholds, and after only 6 months, they had extended Walter's rule northward as far as the Pegasatic Gulf, forcing John II to enter peace negotiations. However, Walter paid only 2 out of the promised 6 months' worth of wages. Apparently, he had learned little from history and foolishly repeated the Byzantine emperor's mistake. Predictably, the Catalans refused to give up the strongholds they had conquered from him. To add insult to injury, Walter tried to hire a portion of the company to expel the rest, which didn't go down well with the rest of the Catalans. Eventually, they took their differences to the one place they could be settled, the battlefield. The Catalans retreated toward Thebes, where they began the preparation of the battlefield. Meanwhile, Walter gathered over 12,400 men, many of them heavily armored knights on horseback. The Catalans numbered only about 6,000 men, 4,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. They knew they could not face the heavy knights in an open field, so they dug in behind a marsh and even prepared the battlefield further by digging small trenches, which they filled with water from a nearby river. When the Athenians arrived on the battlefield, the Turkish contingent that had joined the company at Gallipoli refused to fight and left the formation to watch the spectacle. Meanwhile, the small group of Catalans that had previously been hired by Walter to get rid of the rest of the company refused to fight their comrades and switched sides. Walter was annoyed, though still certain of success. The historian DeVries thinks pride led the Athenians to charge despite the marshy ground, but it's not fully clear. In any case, the inevitable happened. As the Athenians charged the Catalan line, they became mired in the mud. Their lost momentum probably opened them up to the javelins of the almogavars, who, with their light armor, could easily move across the Mediterranean and kill the knights with their knives in close combat. It was not long until the countercharge of the Catalans hammered the Athenian force from the side. To make matters worse, the Turks changed their minds and decided to join the engagement after all. By this point, the entire Athenian force was in retreat. Most historians seem to accept that the Athenians lost most of their forces, including Walter of Brienne. The Catalans had not only won the battle, but also the Duchy of Athens, which they would hold on to for more than 70 years. Only when another free company, the Ricerche Company, pushed into Athenian territory were they finally defeated.